I had the privilege of being an elected Member of Parliament and independent for the neighbouring constituency of Tatton. At the time, the then opposition parties, Liberal Democrats and Labour, were looking for someone outside politics to take on a politician which some of the older people here might remember. His name was Neil Hamilton. They told me about Neil, no one ever told me about Christine. I found out. And the first person they were alleged to have approached to accept this challenge was Terry Waite himself, who comes from Style in the Tatton constituency. And legend had it that he turned it down on the grounds that he'd already served 1 4-year term as a hostage, and you can work out the rest. So I did it, and everybody wrote me off, because they do write off an outsider, especially my former friends in the press. And Jonathan Freeland, a posh columnist from The Guardian, came to Knutsford one day, and he looked at my campaign and said it had all the professionalism of a Blue Peter appeal. So I was sure I was going to lose until the last day, when I knocked on a door of an unfashionable suburb of Northwich, Barnton. The lady of about my age answered it, and she rushed back inside. She said, "I got to put my teeth in." And so she put her teeth in and gave me a thwacking kiss on the lips, and I was home and dry. 11,000 majority, just like that. So then what do? You're the first elected independent for 51 years. Huge burden of responsibility, great opportunity. You have to work out what's the difference between an honourable and a right honourable member, and an honourable and gallant member, and an honourable and learned member. And Brendan, I'll help you out on this. The honourable and learned member is an MP who's also a QC, and an honourable and gallant member is a member of Parliament who's also has been an officer of the field rank, has major and above. And since in my undistinguished military career I'd never managed more than an acting sergeant or corporal, I couldn't be gallant. But your study of German history will tell you that we corporals are a dangerous lot. It was a huge privilege. Obviously I represented local issues, and I was able to do it representing just my conscience and the people I represented. And I was my own social security spokesman, I was my own foreign affairs spokesman, my own defence spokesman. For heaven's sake, I was my own chief whip, you know. So I whipped myself into obedience with what I thought was in the interests of my constituents. The mistake I made, because I thought I was going to lose, I asked the good people of Tatton, promised them I'd serve for 1 term and 1 term only. And although I regretted making that promise, I didn't regret keeping it, because MPs keep their promises, don't they? But I came under huge pressure from my constituents to break the promise, but I didn't. And the Member of Parliament for Tatton is now George Osborne. But it did break the mould. And a man came to see me in my last year from Kidderminster, where they were trying to save the hospital, and they had felt abandoned by their MP, who had formally supported the campaign to save the hospital. But he'd got a job as a junior minister in the Lord Chancellor's department, and suddenly the party mattered more to him than the constituency. So the campaign came to me with a local physician called Dr. Richard Taylor, and said, did I think that if they turned their pressure group into a political party, they stood a chance? And I said, absolutely. And in 2001, he was the candidate, and he won with an 18,000 vote majority and was elected again in 2005. That is to say that it is possible in certain circumstances for people to rise up democratically, which in a sense they did in Tatton, and they certainly did in Kidderminster. And I hope they will in Macclesfield too. Macclesfield is a special case. It has been served for a very long period by Sir Nicholas, and I'm not going to say anything ungracious about Sir Nicholas at all. I think he was just about the best constituency MP there could have been. And in that respect, he'll be a hard act to follow. He actually asked me to propose him for the speakership in 2000, which I would have done if I had not already been asked by 2 others. One was Gwyneth Dunwoody, and the other was Richard Shepherd, another Tory, and I proposed Shepherd. And any of the 3 would have been better than the one we had for those 8 years. And I've written extensively of the MP's expenses scandal, and the Speaker had a part to play in it. And so did the group of senior MPs around him. I think there's no doubt that the party system has failed us. It failed us in that. It failed us, as Terry said in his address, on the Iraq War. And I was very interested that so many of the senior MPs who voted for the Iraq War on the 18th of March 2003 were also found to have been extremely delinquent in their own expenses. That is, they got the big things wrong and they got the little things wrong. I've written and spoken extensively about the rise of the political class, and I think this is a time when we recuperate our politics to ourselves through people like Brendan, local people, independent people, people who've had a life outside politics. I'll quote John Bright. John Bright was a great Lancashire reformer and Quaker who in 1854 rose in the House of Commons and he said, "There is growing, and no one regrets this more than I do, a feeling of bitterness and anger against that class which has for a long period conducted the public affairs of this country." That was 1854. There was a recession in the newly established manufacturing industries and a costly foreign war, the one in the Crimea. Then as now. And he said, John Bright said, "The angel of death is abroad in the land, and you can almost hear the beating of his wings." Well, this is right where we are now. I'm giving a speech in Wootton Bassett next week to the kids in the school. This is where the funeral corteges of our young men and young women come through. Some 250 now killed in Afghanistan. And this is not the right time to get into the merits of this. All I would say is that the political class has taken leave of its history. I once heard a speech by Baroness Helena Kennedy, a tough Glaswegian lawyer who was once a friend of New Labour. She isn't anymore. And she described Tony Blair's Downing Street as a history-free zone. You think what that means? We British are now fighting our fourth war in Afghanistan. You might like to wonder who won the other three. We didn't. There is not a regiment in the British Army, not one of the old regiments or the new merged regiments, that does not have Afghanistan and Mesopotamia, Iraq on its battle honours. Not one. And I think this election campaign, you know, the dog that hasn't barked are these foreign policy issues. We haven't heard anything about them at all. But I think they deserve some independent analysis and independent voting. The vote to go to war in Iraq in March 2003 was a disgrace to the party system. We were let down by so many of our MPs. And I know so many Tory MPs who regret their vote, but are yet unwilling to say so. The one who was willing to say so, not surprisingly, was Boris Johnson. We are gathered here at a time of extraordinary disrepute in our politics. I was elected in 1997 on an issue of public trust in public life. People called me sometimes an anti-sleaze campaigner. Well, if I'm an anti-sleaze campaigner, I'm a failed anti-sleaze campaigner, because it's much worse now than it was then. And the government elected on this issue then got embroiled in all kinds of scandals, starting with the Bernie Ecclestone affair. Individual ministers, senior ministers, had to resign 2 or sometimes 3 times. And on top of that, we have the expenses scandal, which has been truly disgraceful. These are, if you become an MP, you are bound to certain principles of public life, of which the first is leadership. And it is not leadership in feathering your own nest.